This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, and this is the podcast where we learn from our guests how to be better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and deal with some of the stuff that gets in the way of it. This episode is our last in the 10th season of the show. Thank you so much for listening. This is set to be our final episode for the year as well, although I think I might squeeze in a few bonus episodes. But make sure you stay in touch with the show. Subscribe wherever you're listening. You can find video versions of many of these episodes on the Hope 1032 YouTube channel. And you can find me, stay in touch, on Instagram at laura.bennett_. When was the last time you felt awe, had a sense of wonder, or were inspired by graciousness? Our guest today is Sydney-based author and journalist Julia Baird. Julia co-hosts The Drum on ABC TV and writes columns for the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and Harper's Bazaar. She's a former senior editor of Newsweek in New York, an op-ed contributor for the New York Times and the Philadelphia Enquirer. Her first book, Media Tarts, was based on her PhD in history about the portrayal of female politicians. Victoria, her biography of Queen Victoria, was published to critical acclaim in 2016, and during the pandemic, her third book, Phosphorescence, became a multi-award-winning international bestseller with its timely message about clinging to what helps us find light in the darkness. 3 years on, still reflective about the cancer diagnosis and surgeries that were part of her darkness, Julia brings us Bright Shining, a study of grace and its power to change everything. Let's welcome Julia to the show. What was your headspace like going into Bright Shining compared to Phosphorescence?
So my last book was really, it was just for me, like I wasn't anticipating what the nerve it would strike at all. It was just one of those things where I just had to write it, and I wanted to write it for my kids. I just had a bunch of things I needed to say. And just the timing, like it arrived, it was about what sustains you when the world goes dark. And then suddenly the world went dark. And we were dealing with COVID and a whole bunch of like anxieties and fears. And so it was really delightful, actually, dealing with like the feedback, the correspondence, people writing to me and saying, yes, they felt the same way. And thinking a lot about awe and wonder, and people telling me their stories of awe and wonder. So for this one, it was almost the things I didn't have the room to say in the last one. And it's still very much the same thing. This is really just something I've thought about a lot for my whole life. And I really have been thinking so hard about awe and the importance of awe and the need for smallness, which I think we underestimate all of the time. And how when we're exposed to awe regularly and when we hunt it regularly, it really changes our lives. And there was a study done recently across 26 countries and from different cultures, and they were trying to establish what were the most common forms of awe. Like, how did people experience this the most? Is it waterfalls? Is it is it artwork? Is it symphonies? Is it the ocean? And they found that the number one thing was seeing it in other people, so moral beauty, which is what grace is and which is what I'm writing about. To me, my mind space was I wanted to stay in the space of thinking about the things that unite us, thinking about the things that kind of draw us together and express our humanity, and also the things that we're craving and you don't really hear many people speaking about. Like, one thing I've noticed most of all with talking about this book is that people don't really understand what grace is. And we don't have forms in which we talk about it. So I wanted to just talk about it and start some conversations.
And I think your writing, the way that you write, gives us the space that is needed to ask questions like, what is grace? To think about it, because there's something, your writing beautifully slows us down and opens our minds out, which I think is needed if we're going to talk about some of these things. And as you've written about grace, how would you define it now? What do you think it is?
I'm talking about grace here between people, because there's religious concept of grace, which is really important, especially to people of faith, which is in that grace comes from God. I think people of faith will see that grace comes from God, and people who don't have a faith or who are atheists or whatever will see it as kind of coming from an essential human goodness and so on. So what I noticed was that people really talk about it as a mysterious and ineffable thing. Like if you look at the tradition of writers and thinkers, they're like, I don't know exactly what it is. Like it's almost like it defies logic or reason, but you know it when you see it. So for me, I think it really crystallized around three ideas. The first is fundamentally it's not deserved. So it's mercy, it's not merit. It's a goodness that kind of goes far beyond what is often required in any situation. So it doesn't depend on the worthiness of the recipient. And I think that's really crucial. The second is recognizing the humanity in other people, which means we're more likely to cut them slack. We're more likely to give them benefit of the doubt. We're more likely to stop and say, why would they be saying that? Why would someone be filled with that kind of hatred or resentment or fear or anxiety? Why would they make stupid decisions? Where have they come from in their life? I think that's a really critical thing. And we look for the glimmers of the good in people as opposed to pouncing upon any signs of getting things wrong and stuffing up. And thirdly, for me, because I've spent so much time thinking about our relationship with the natural world and living in it, as we all do, I think that the way that we live on Earth and being kind of very fully alive is living in a state of grace, because we've done nothing to deserve living on this planet. And it's all of its marvels and all of its beauties and all of its astonishing wonder. Like, I think that's a fundamental grace that we've all been given.
Yeah. And it might be, again, that your interest in grace, your writing of this book, is coming in at just the right time, in the same way that your last book did when the world went dark. I feel like the world is in a time where grace is not really as tangible or as felt as it could otherwise be. You know, in a world where we've got like conflict and we have cancel culture and we have all of that sort of ferociousness, what would it look like to be extending grace to one another?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because when I speak to people about it, fundamentally, people say they define it by its absence. The first time when I decided to write about this, I put something out on Twitter, which I still prefer calling it. And everyone was like, oh, I don't know, I haven't seen it. They'd say maybe Jacinda Ardern, which is really interesting, and how she was with, especially after the massacres at her in the mosque, and how inclusive she was of people in her own populations. I think that we don't see it on the public stage. We have a lot of leaders in particular that think that they need to draw on what Paul Keating called our darker threads. At the time of the national apology, he gave an interview on ABC TV, and he was speaking about how you need to pull on the golden threads in our community. And they're there. We're a compassionate people. We're a decent people. We believe in the fair go. We believe in equality of opportunity, but we're also worried and anxious and often given untruths. And so, you know, and Abraham Lincoln called it the better angels of our nature as well. I think we'd be more likely to cut people slack if we saw it happening. Like, wouldn't it be actually deeply shocking if a political leader was like, yeah, look, okay, he made a mistake, but this happens.
Yeah.
He's obviously a decent bloke. He's working really hard. He's working around the clock at the moment under a lot of pressure. And there's something kind of arresting about that we don't see it, but we see it all around us in our lives. And I think that's what I saw during COVID and also times of my own illness and so on. I've seen people live and work in a way where they're looking after people and tending to people and, you know, neighbours doing things for each other. People who work with those with disabilities, who work in aged care, day in, day out, not stopping to say to people, oh, how did you vote in the last election, by the way? Or, you know, like any other metrics by which we can judge people. But there's a human need, and they try to restore dignity and try to just basically look after them. And those gestures, I think, are incredibly comforting. I think if we saw more of it, we're more likely, the science shows we're more likely to do it ourselves. We will kind of imitate it, and we are also uplifted by it. And there is interesting science on what forgiveness does to our bodies and to our actual health, and what giving people the benefit of the doubt does. So I just think we'd all be better off on just so many levels. And it's really important to not say, I'm really conscious of not just going, oh, everyone just be really kind. It's not about that. It's not like walking through sunlit plains, just doling out kind of, I don't know, like blessings to people or whatever. It is really hard it is hard work. If you think it's easy working in an aged care facility, easy working in an emergency care ward with all of the exhaustion and the demands and everything that's required, if you think it's easy forgiving someone who's wronged you, especially if they don't, for example, feel any particular remorse, which is when we need to start thinking about forgiveness in a different way, I think, about more like an unburdening than because it never should excuse behaviour. It never should replace justice. So, I think that's a really, really important point to make, because people do think of it as just being generally sweet. And and because some people are born sweet, and that's awesome. But it's not. It's actually you have to like fight for it in a way and think about it.
Yeah, it's not all of us that are born sweet. And I think it's good that you do make that distinction about it being hard, because sometimes the ideas of grace or forgiveness can make people think we've just got to suck it up, like that if you're being gracious, just holding on instead of processing it out.
Yeah, no. And I think often grace is, like imposed on people like women, for example, like just be sweet and light and don't complain about your lot when it's obviously ferociously bad in so many ways. I mean, just this morning I've been working on a piece about the number of women that have been killed by their partners, 5 in 10 days, and the need for anger about that, like the real need for anger. If you really burrow down into grace, you'll see that so much of it comes from within a lot of those movements for justice and to liberate and to free people, to say we can have a better world and we need a better world and we deserve one. And you know what? People can be persuaded. People can shift and can come with us on that. And I think that urge for that arc is where I've seen a lot of grace in people that literally does actually stop me in my tracks. I'm amazed by it. Yeah. Do
you think that grace would really be accepted though? Like in the sort of one-on-one moments, I think we can embrace grace. But then when we talk about the political sphere, when we talk about a lot of the dialogue we see in the public spaces, do you think we really would embrace grace or be annoyed that people weren't being sort of held to account or being, faced with the consequences? Where's the role for grace in those kind of circumstances?
Yeah, well, think of a particular one while I'm still going, while I answer that, because it never should replace it. Like it never, there has to be consequences. There has to be a reckoning, and there has to be justice. I think grace often comes alongside that. It is the extent to which you pile on another person, the extent to which you accept genuine remorse, or whether you continue to exploit their weaknesses. But you have to always challenge systems and structures that oppress people or silence people or make people go hungry or let murders occur. So I think that's the fundamental thing and why I wrestled so much with forgiveness in that, because if you're being abused, forgiveness is often weaponized by an abuser who tells you to accept it. That's not right.
Yeah.
And that can happen more broadly culturally as well, because we're so used to forgiving certain things and being told to forgive certain things and letting people off the hook, and then they're in trouble, and then for something, and they're, I don't know, sexual assault, and everyone's like, oh, cancel culture. Well, I mean, it's actually the law for starters and the proper application of the law half the time. So, yeah, I don't see it as separate as law. As I said, I see more grace in the people who continue to call to account and see that things can be better, saying there's a status quo.
And I guess what I'm thinking of is in the political language, right? Like we were mentioning earlier, the leaders that will always like draw on the worst bit, as opposed to saying, oh, they had a bad day, let's sort of extend that kindness. I wonder if we would accept that kind of behaviour from our leaders, or whether we'd think, oh, that's a bit weak, or etc., when we're not seeing them be sort of pushy. I wonder if people would embrace it, or if it would just take us a minute to accept that behaviour when we're not used to seeing it.
Yeah, 100% I think people would embrace it. But it's not about not fighting for what you believe in. It's not about like putting up a political point or saying, you know what, if you've said a racist thing, that is disgusting and that is not acceptable and that is whatever. But it's about the way you treat your opponent tough. That's a lot of the time. It's the whole, like, when they go low, we go high. And there was a reason that people still talk about that phrase, because it's really unusual. It's quite countercultural to go high. And again, high doesn't mean a superiority thing. It's just like, I'm not going to keep brawling. I'm going to keep it to the issues. I'm going to play the issue, not the person. So many people on social media, after getting attacked, are suicidal, are deeply vulnerable, are kind of like humans who are struggling with it, whether they've made a mistake or whatever. And I think that we just need to bring more subtle judgment on that and realize, when we're adding our weight to that pack, what does it mean and what can it mean in that person's life?
What is the grace that's inspiring you at the moment, the people that you think are exemplifying it really well?
I spend a lot of time with stolen generations people, or members of the stolen generations in my book. And I am amazed by how they continue, despite all the wound and the pain and the horror, to care for and love each other and try to help other members of mob to heal, and how to try to educate people still after everything. And I think the kindness and the inclusiveness, and there's a lot of rage now, and there's a lot of frustration now, and there was so much ugliness, there was so much lack of grace in all of that referendum debate. It was awful. It was just awful. Like, I mean, if you can think of a moment can you think of a moment during that debate where someone pulled back and said, don't let these dark threads out, don't do it. We know what happens when you appeal to that stuff. And then we know it spirals into social media, and we know it goes to death threads, and we know all that kind of thing. So I have a lot of respect for, members of First Nations people, and I want to work out how to continue to walk with them after everything that's happened. And also nurses. I speak about them a lot in my book now. And part of this is I've spent a lot of time in hospital over the last few years, and I've really watched them. And I've also had moments of like intense vulnerability myself. And I just have so much respect. I was talking to a friend the other day who went to hospital. What was it for? And how you almost you don't kind of fall in love with them, but you're so grateful for how they are. And they don't know you from a bar of soap, and they're probably never going to see you again. And it's hard. It's really hard work. And so the smallest of gestures, from bringing you chips of ice when you're not supposed to have it after surgery, to just bringing another one of those warm blankets. How good are the warm blankets? Tucking your toes in, like caring for you, trying to anticipate your needs. I write a lot about a poet called Laura Gilpin, who I love. She was an American poet who won the Walt Whitman Prize in the 1970s for her work, and then went into care. And some of the work that she wrote about the weight of a soul, and it's this real kind of tenderness and being with people and being present with people at a time when they've got this really great need. So, and if I can add to that, sorry, I know it's a long answer.
That's all right.
I got in contact with 2 Brazilian nurses who, during COVID, I'm not sure if you remember the story, but they were in Sao Paulo, and they were really upset by the people who were in there who were sick and dying and didn't have family with them. And a lot of nurses were really upset by that, as well as people who had their families and couldn't be with them. It's kind of a dreadful thing to be in pain or to be dying and to not have your loved ones with you.
Yeah.
And they did this small gesture, which was they got these 2 surgical gloves, filled them with water, hot water, warm, and put it over, kind of knotted it together and slid it over their hand, so it was of the patient. So it was like their hand was being held.
Wow.
And they called it the hands of love or the hands of God. And immediately they could see in their vitals that the patient was improving, that there was providing some comfort to them, that was having a physical manifestation of like relief.
Wow.
And I was so touched by like the thoughtfulness of that gesture. I tracked them down with the help of my Brazilian friend, Susanna, and spoke to them, and they were like, look, we hear people talk about it in the abstract, looking after each other and empathy and all of that, but we need to do it in our lives. And that those people in front of us it was someone's, wife, brother, mother, sister, lover, friend, neighbor, and we could care for them in that moment. I mean, there's something very beautiful in that, I think. And it's those small, unhistoric acts that kind of keep the world going, I think.
And they're very human moments. And I wonder for you, if you hadn't had your experiences with illness over the last few years, do you think you would have the same desire to be an awe hunter, as you put it, to explore these ideas of grace and wonder?
Oh, it's definitely given me a greater hunger. Like I've always been interested in awe without giving it a name. But I think what struck me was when things were really bleak, how sustained I was by it. And that really surprised me. I held on to it like life rafts. And I did with the idea of grace as well. There's something about thinking about beauty, and in this case, moral beauty, that makes you realize it's worth being here. Like despite everything and everything we do to each other and how we are and how we brawl and spit and carry on. And yet, despite it all, there are people who play pianos in the midst of ruins. There's in horrific circumstances, there's still moments of connection and love and humor. And I just find that deeply comforting. So it's actually been a joy for me to spend a lot of time thinking about it when I've wrestled with my own physical frailties, for sure. Yeah.
And the title Bright Shining, where does that come from? Between Phosphorescence and this one, we know you have a love for the light, for taking people in that kind of direction, but what's the inspiration for it?
Bright shining like the sun, the line in Amazing Grace, which I've always loved that line. I just thought it was so beautifully written. And so Amazing Grace, this hymn that was written by a man who'd been a slave trader, right, who later repented and then tried to join the abolitionist movement, but it became an anthem of the civil rights movement. And that itself, like a secular kind of hymn. And I think that is really fascinating from its origins to that. And Bright Shining like the sun, I discovered that stanza wasn't written by Newton. It became an African-American spiritual song, and it was first included in Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And to me, the poem which I've found, I think of it as a poem, the hymn, it is often sung by people when they have no words. There are just no words left. And then you sing about the fact that we're all wretched, but by the end, we're all standing in light. Obama at a funeral after a gun shooting found himself trying to speak about grace, and he did beautifully with the help of his friend Marilyn Robinson, who'd been corresponding with about it. And then he just started to sing this. And there's something like in the midst of that horrendous grief, it's almost like saying, but we still have something to hold on to. There is this thing which is the better part of us and who we are, and we have to hold on to that, because if we don't hold on to that, we kind of have nothing. I think that as well, to me, it is like the sun bright shining. And this was kind of important. Like it warms us, it's beautiful, our crops grow, we're fueled by the sun. But by the same token, the sun is noisy and chaotic and difficult. And I just really couldn't believe how noisy it was, actually. I'm so glad that sound doesn't travel through space. And, it's made by fusion. And I think that the light is made by fusion. And to me, it's really important to remember that grace isn't, as I was saying before, isn't just benign and easy and just like playing a flute. I don't know. When you hear about stories like Danny Abdullah, who he and his wife, they lost their 4 children by a driver who was on various substances, I believe, who decided to forgive him. And I was struck when he says, I have to wake up every day sometimes and go through all that all over again. That is not easy. You might mentally make the decision, okay, I want to live in forgiveness, I'm going to forgive that driver, but you would still wake up and go, damn it, where are my children? And what, is this person, what have they done? I think that's really important, because if we dismiss it as something that's, skipping around fields, giving out daisies by, people who are always happy and cheerful, we miss that it is tough and necessary and can really change things if we hold on to it.
Yeah. And there's something that can be lost if people just relegate grace to a religious concept or a faith concept. Some won't want to embrace that, but if it's something that each of us can have a connection to, regardless of what our perspectives might be, that sort of opens it up. And I know it would be easy for a lot of people because grace, because these ideas of awe, wonder, etc., they are something that involves pause and consideration and intention, and it'd be easy for us to just let them slide. Why do you think it's important for us to embrace grace and try to create a culture where grace is more present?
There's so many studies, and again, I'm really fascinated by science trying to capture these concepts like this, right? It's very elusive and it's very difficult. But there are ways in which we see the impact on kids who are more likely to do it, the impact on employees at a company who, if they witness acts of generosity or kindness, the boss who took a pay cut when he was during COVID, instead of sacking like a whole tranche of his employees, when we see this, we're more likely to do it ourselves, but also be kind of uplifted and be elevated. I think that's what I mean by it can change everything. I understand there's a movie out about Nicholas Winton. I was listening to an interview this morning about it, and I was like, oh, damn it. Like, I literally had a chapter on him and I don't know what happened to it. But Nicholas Winton was, someone who got all these children out of Prague just before the Nazi occupation, mostly Jewish children, but actually a whole bunch of, like, hundreds of children. And his whole life never said anything about it until towards the end of his life. And the way he did it, and all the people who worked hard and risked their own lives to do all of that, you read those stories, and I know I keep going back to this point, but there's just something intensely comforting knowing that that's what humans are like, and that's what we do. And again, that's at a time of war. That's when you see all these atrocities and grotesque behavior and ugliness, and young people sent out to do, sent out to war and never return. But there was Nicholas Winton, and there are so many people who do work like that. I think they're the stories that we need to tell, and we need to remember, to know that there are other ways of being and other ways of living here, which are fundamentally about looking after each other.
How's your behaviour changed since writing this book?
Everyone gives me grief if I say something bad. I do. I don't know, because I really don't want to hold myself up as like I'm not. Like, I very deliberately have said, like, I'm not this great repository of grace, but I love it and I want to understand it. My mother was very much about it. She was really interested in especially forgiveness. She did a lot of work with prisoners, people forgiving themselves, and also other people forgiving them. And often she talked about it in circumstances when I was like, that makes no sense. Like, I can't what? I think that having the experience of just sitting and thinking about it and has just really convinced me that it's something that you need to meditate on and try, actually, especially if you've got kids as well and you want to show them a different way of being. And you want to say be kind and be decent, but there's actually beyond that. There's another thing to do beyond eye for an eye. Even when your sibling is being crazy, you can be the bigger person, you can be the better person, you can be all those kinds of things. So I think I'm just really, really convinced of its power, actually, because I've spoken to a lot of people who've done bad things and a lot of people who've forgiven bad things, and what breaks the cycle and allows a life to change, or allows a life to be kind of free of the intense burden of something bad having happened to you, is stepping back and thinking of things in a different way, and thinking of another person's humanity in particular.
Well, it's been an absolute privilege to talk to you, Julia, about this book, Bright Shining. Is there any last thoughts you wanted to give our listeners before we wrap it up?
I reckon, I think fundamentally people might have their own definitions of what it is. For me, it's really important that we talk about it. We start having conversations about when we've seen it and what it might look like. And once you start to look for it, you kind of pick up on it and are more interested in it. And then maybe that's something we should be demanding of our leaders. Maybe we need to have bigness and not smallness. Maybe we need to I think there's something in us that does hunger for it. I really do. I think we're hungry for seeing and understanding those moments of beauty. So I think I would just say, don't underestimate moral beauty. It's important. And just like the suffragettes were like, we fight for bread and roses. We fight for equality and for justice and for a free and fair society, but we also fight for art and leisure and beauty. And I think moral beauty And the seeking of awe and understanding awe is a really important part of it.
Imagine that, a world with a bit more grace. Imagine what our public spaces would look like, even our personal lives, if we held to it a bit more. Julia's book, Bright Shining, is out now. Have a read of it. Let me know what you think. You can email undistracted@hope1032.com.au. Find me on Instagram at laura.bennett_. And until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.